তোমাকে কলকাতায় কি করে আসতে দেওয়া হলো তাই ভাবছি।
মানে?
এখানে আজকাল কেউ আসতে চায় না, জানো তো?
আমি চাই।
সে তো দেখতেই পাচ্ছি। তোমার বাবা মা কি করে অ্যালাউ করলেন তাই ভাবছি।
বোধহয় ভাবলেন আপনি যখন আছেন তখন আর ভয় কি।
So, good evening and welcome to all of you. We'll do the book launch. We have with us Shantanu Roy-Chaudhury, who's a publisher at Om Books. A big thank you to Starmark for hosting us and hosting this event. A very big thank you to Prohor.in, which is the broadcasting partner and the media partner for this event. Without further ado, let's unveil and launch the book. So on this occasion, we'd like to get started by, I'd request Shantanu Roy-Chaudhury, dear Shantanu Da, for thanking him for bringing this book, this lovely book out, and ask him to say a few words. This is an opening address.
Thank you. Thank you, Ovik. Welcome all of you, and it's great to be back and in the middle of with about 100 people after 2 years. I have not been with 100 people in 2 years. Thank you all for coming. Thank you. Just a few words of thanks to my colleague at Om, Ajay, who trusted me enough to go ahead with this book. Borunda for trusting Om and me for doing this book. Srijit, thank you so much, for coming. Titimanda did us the honors at the first book launch of this particular book at Goa. Starmark, Shumita, thank you, and Prohor.in, thank you so much for coming on board. It's been very good publishing this over the last year, despite all the obstacles. We've tried to expand the publishing horizons at Om Books. We came out with the Shomitra Chatterjee book. We're coming out with a lot of non-fiction, fiction, books on cybersecurity, books addressing the pandemic, books on true war stories, true crime stories. All of that is happening. In fact, we have quite a spectrum of books coming from Om in the next couple of years, I hope. But at the end of the day, all of you have to be buying and reading the book. There's no point in publishing books if it remains at Facebook likes of 600 without one sale. So please buy, please patronize the publishing industry. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Shantanu Da. And now that we've got the panel, let me just get started. And the first question, which I think is in everyone's mind really, which I want to pose to Baba, is to talk about not just the subject of the book, but why the book. Because if we look at the last decade, you've been a prolific writer. You've written a number of books, not just in Bangla, but also in English. But all of them belong to a particular genre, and that's detective thriller writing. The Indian detective, a sort of Indian Moss or an Indian Frost. Now you've broken away from all of that and put your personal recollections and painted this portrait of Satyajit Ray. And I wanted to ask why this particular book and why now?
One of the reasons was certainly the centenary year. And I kept on thinking, I had thought of writing a book on Ray, especially all the things, all the stories that were in my mind, and I still remembered. And I thought, should I write? But there is an innate laziness on your part, especially like a person with me, a person like him, because there are a whole lot of things that you want to remain private. You don't want to sort of make it public property. And then I thought that another thing happened, the COVID, and I was sort of, kind of imprisoned, self-imprisonment for survival, I suppose. But this book came as a survival for me, survival of my sanity. Those 1.5 years I devoted to writing this book and thereby kept my sanity. Or else I would have started climbing up the wall, really. So this book happened finally. And I'm very, very happy that I've written it, though I had reluctance initially. True.
Thanks for that. There are two main sections in the book. And the first section is far more autobiographical, where you're talking about your recollections throughout the entire shooting, the filming, the making of Shimabadda. And in that context, I wanted to ask you, because everyone, and there are so many of us here who've known you for a very long time, possibly not as long as me, but some, like Shundukaku, longer than me. And if we look at the
Some have known me before you.
Before me, surely. If we look at two personas, there's the on-screen personality of Shyamulendu, who is a loner, essentially, who is very reticent, who keeps to himself, and who, as we see, as the narrative progresses, is actually capable of guile, is capable of subterfuge. And everyone who knows you to be quite the opposite. Dead straight, gregarious, fun-loving, life and soul of the party, not the person to shirk away from shaking a leg more. So how did this transformation happen on the sets? And what was the experience of you being transformed from Borun Jonto, the man, into Shyamulendu Chatterjee, the character?
Actually, I never thought of this before. Only when I was writing this book, that thought occurred to me, how is it that he never told me a word as to how I should approach this role? Because he told me that, Borun, since I have given you this role of Shyamulendu Chatterjee, I would imagine that you understand that role. And I would let you do it as you want it. But should you run counter to my ideas, then you'll have to follow my diktat. That was that. That was all he had told me about guidance as far as this character was concerned. And then I thought, were there other ways he had done it? And I started recounting a whole lot of small incidents which didn't strike me at that point. But later, when I started thinking, was all that done deliberately by the man? Or am I imagining things? I now can't verify unless I do a planchette. And people won't believe me what happens on the planchette. But otherwise, there is no way of verifying. But I jotted them down because those things happened. First few days, a whole lot of people from the agency were coming. People who knew Ray from the agency days. And Ray didn't say a word. And then one fine morning, I found them not coming there anymore. And I couldn't call them up, so their visits had dried up. And my wife did come a couple of times. And Ray, with his, I would say, the Brahmo that he was, he didn't directly ask her not to come. But what he said was much more subtle. When Soumitra is acting, Deepa doesn't come. Deepa, of course, is Soumitra's wife. And she took the hint and stopped coming. There was Babu, there was Shundip, but he was interested in photography and he was much too young and he was busy doing his own thing. And he couldn't provide time for me. Monkudi, that is Bijay Bodhi, would come during the lunch hours. But there was yawning gap. I was sitting really biting my thumb and I didn't know what to do. But now that I think back, he deliberately cut me off from my social sources so that I became a loner and I could start introspecting about the role. I find no other way of doing it. And when I started acting, I was a different human being. Believe you me, because my mother could not recognize me. She was very, very hurt, disappointed after watching the movie. And I said, Ma, what's wrong with you? Why are you looking so grave? I said, Amar Habulke ami khuje pelam na. My nickname. I couldn't find him. I take it as one of the greatest compliments I've ever had in life. So that, I hope that answers your question.
We'll delve into that a little bit more, Baba, because you talked about getting into, getting under the skin of the character, and Satyajit Ray not just enabling you, empowering you, but naturally getting you into the groove of things. There is a passage here where you've talked about the initial days of shooting and the way that he shot it in sequence, particularly the first days of shooting in Patna, right? If you could maybe read out a passage from that, I think that'll be hugely insightful for everyone present.
Yeah. As Sundar and or Siddhartha would verify, would sort of second me, Ray was always shooting in sequence. So the beginning was shot at the beginning, then the middle part, and then the end part. And he Oh, don't. I haven't asked you to endorse you. At least I haven't paid you to endorse. Okay, all right. No, but I will ask, what was your experience like then?
What you were saying about the subtle hint from Rai that your wife not be there and so on. Fortunately, when I did my first film, I was not married. So I didn't have those problems. So that was brilliant. So that was one experience. Anything else you wanted to know?
No. About Pratidwandi.
Yeah.
Was it shot in the chronological order?
My memory is failing me, Varun. It's 52 years since the film was shot. So I have to say that I don't remember, but I don't think that was so, literally speaking. No.
No, but I don't want to refresh your memory. But the thing is...
You'd better not, because then a number of memories might surface, which we might not like to recount.
We will leave that for another evening.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Right. No, the thing was, he did shoot in chronological order, by and large.
Because I remember that you told me once that you started the film by shooting at the race course. That was not the beginning of the film.
No, I don't think I said that. It started with Patna. And that's how the film begins, after the title part, that is. So I will just read out a small part from that, and my maiden experience of acting, quote unquote. The first day was, we were shooting the bicycle shots in Patna. I was coming out of the medical college, and then I was, not the medical college, the arts college, and I was rushing off to an interview with the Peter Company. Peter Company. And the route that I was to take was the road that girdles the Gandhi Maidan leading up to the Golghar. The jeep was to precede me. Ray explained that he would try and have the jeep driving at a moderate speed so that I had no difficulty keeping up with it. Try and keep a distance of 10 to 15 feet between our jeep and your cycle. I nodded silently. I assumed he was using a 35mm lens that gave him greater latitude in terms of focus. Because at that time I was shooting corporate films, documentaries and ad films on a regular basis for Clarion, so I had a fair idea of what lenses to use for which shot. In the middle of the take, a problem manifested itself for which I was not prepared. As I kept following the jeep, there was a bullock cart that came into our path. After overtaking the cart, the jeep went back to the left lane. But when I was to overtake the bullock cart, I ran the risk of momentarily going out of frame. I had to decide on the spot whether to carry on with the shot or ask for a retake. But since Ray didn't signal anything from the jeep, I carried on. And in the film, it looked realistic enough. Just then I thought of a little improvisation. If this guy, I reasoned, is going to appear for an important interview, won't he be worried about being on time, especially when he's cycling all the way? So shouldn't he look at his wristwatch just once? That is exactly what I did in that scene. Apparently, this piece of improvisation didn't go unnoticed by Ray, who was supposed to have remarked, "That's a nice touch." I learned this later from Shondip Babu, Ray's son, with whom I had become quite friendly by then. Ray uses this shot as a cutting point for the interview at Hindustan Peters. So that's how. And I thought it was the first piece of improvisation acting that I did. He had never asked me to do this, but I thought that I might look at the watch. And he appreciated that, though he never said it. This is one thing I've found about him. When you had a piece of good shot, a good take, he wouldn't normally, he would sort of, go gaga about, like today's directors are. He is much more appreciative. But Ray was really, okay, good. That's the kind of thing. Sundar, you have any other difference when he said that, oh, that's brilliant, that's lovely?
If we start exchanging memories and anecdotes, we can go well into the night, which certainly I don't want to do.
No.
But since we are getting to that, about him being very restrained in his reactions, when much later I did Ganushot through with him, it was what in those days was called a negative character, rather than being called a villain. And it was probably, certainly with him, the first time that I was doing a negative character. And as you just said, there were no reactions from him. We went from one shot was okay, so we went from one shot to the next, and so it carried on. So I was feeling a little concerned about that. So after a few days of shooting, after a shot, I sort of summoned up courage to go and ask him very gently, Manikda thik hocche to? So all he had to say is, thik na hole ami bolbo. That was it.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much, Sundar.
Talking about today's directors, Srijit, let me get you into the conversation and start by asking you, as the preeminent filmmaker of the younger generation, what Ray's legacy has meant to you, to your work, and how it's influenced you. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but...
Thank you so much. First of all, I'd like to apologize for the delay. I was 19 minutes late due to monumental post-production work which I'm submerged in currently, and the traffic. It was a combination, but it turned out to be a blessing in disguise, because clearly, as I see, there are at least 4 people, Shankar Lalda, Siddhartha Da, Ashok Da, and Sundar Da, in whose presence my inaugurating a book on Satyajit Ray would have been a travesty. So I'm glad I could avoid the travesty and, surreptitiously slip into the, smuggle myself into the panel, and then get caught in a kind of a sweet crossfire between Ray's Shyamulendu and Ray's Siddhartha, which is stuff dreams are made of. And so I still am in a daze. And as I recover, I thank you for all the sobriquets and all the adjectives, but clearly it is a case of men who knew too little, speaking about the man who knew too much. So, like a student approaches a national library, when you're walking towards National Library as a student, the entire structure, even the edifice, the facade of the edifice is too intimidating. I'm not even going into the separate chambers and the racks, and the books which await the student. So it is with me and Ray, and for me, he's a library. He's not a book. He's not a book rack. He's an entire library. So you want to understand what silence means, how to use silence in a film soundtrack, you go to a certain section. You want to understand how you use actors, you go to another section. You want to understand what is costume design, you go to another section. So there are sections, like there are sections in the National Library. There are sections in the corpus of the man's work, which a student can only wander and look in awe, and that's exactly what I've been doing. My first film, Autograph, was a tribute to Nayok, and it was because Nayak is my favorite Satyajit Ray film, and so it was something which was an overbearing burden on me. I needed to take it out of my system because I understood if I did not make Autograph, I will not be able to make any other film, because there was a point of time during university where I used to converse through the dialogues of Nayok and even other Ray films. So such was his humongous influence on us. So that's how I started my journey, by paying him the Guru Dokkhina, as we say, by paying a tribute to Nayok. And even after that, I think his stature has only grown as more and more exposure has come in. I've read more of him, I've seen more of his interviews, I've gone back and rewatched more of his films, and not for nothing is he the giant we all know him to be. And again, as Sundar said, that if I start talking about each of the section of the National Library, we'll get into the night. So yeah, I guess he's an institution for me. He's kind of a beacon who guides me through the various aspects of filmmaking.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks for that, Srijit. Shantananda, let me come to you. Now, as far as Baba and I are concerned, there's one thing, right? I mean, you've worked as an editor, as a senior editor at very high levels with the largest publishers that there are in the ecosystem. But as far as Baba and I are concerned, you're first and foremost a family friend. I mean, you've worked with us on our books. You've mentored me when I was starting out writing my first books. You edited my first book, if I remember correctly, my novel with HarperCollins. And now I know, because I happen to be staying with him, so I could overhear all the conversations and see the emails going back and forth. And towards, as a run-up to the launch, you started involving me as well in these proceedings. I wanted to ask you, and I think members of the audience would also love to know, what your experience has been working with Baba as an editor, but really as a collaborator.
No editor or publisher will publicly go on record to say that the experience with an author has not been good. So I'm not even going there. But it's been like, ever since I started publishing at HarperCollins, Penguin, cinema has been an abiding interest, and Satyajit Ray has been at the foremost thoughts in my thoughts right from the first book that I commissioned was a Satyajit Ray. I worked on a number of books with the Ray Society. Shankar Lalda is here. We worked on the Ravi Shankar book that Satyajit Ray was making a film on Ravi Shankar, which never. So we created a book even on a film that he did not make. You know, so we then subsequently the book on Alien, the book on Pother Pachali, the sketchbook, the entire making of Pother Pachali. So, you know, Borunda, when he mentioned that, you know, he'd like to, I've been talking to him for about 2-3 years now that, you know, we should do this book. He did a short article for Cinemazi, the cinema portal that I am associated with. He did a short article on Srima Buddha. And that's how it came about. And, you know, it's been fascinating the way he's brought out certain stories, you know, like both in the making of Srima Buddha, his first meeting with Satyajit Ray is fantastic, you know, like a recorder, not a tape recorder, not playing, not working. You know, you go out to interview Satyajit Ray and you find that the tape recorder is not working and you don't have the questions written down. So you're just doing that out of memory and then coming and reproducing it. So fascinating stories like that. Of course, the Soumitra Chatterjee thing, you know, I found it really intriguing that, you know, he's given that kind of a hint. But apart from that, also, as the book developed, one of the things that, you know, we realized right at the beginning was just the making of Srima Buddha wasn't going to, you know, and that's where he sort of came up with ideas, okay, can we talk about this aspect? And through that, the book, the kind of collaborative thing, and I also started watching Srima Buddha again. As he described the scene, I would watch Srima Buddha and see, okay, does that work? You know, that kind of collaboration, he drove me to it, you know, like that was a very interactive process. And then he started talking about, acha, let's do, nobody has spoken about Ray's title designs. You know, the Saul, he's named a chapter, the Saul being his own Saul bus, which is, I think, incredible. You know, like you know, I have not read anywhere else about that aspect. Then Ray's library. You know, I have been to Shundip Da's house. I've been privy to that library. But the way he described it, even on phone, I said, yes, put that in the chapter. I would like to read that, you know, that I've seen those books, but what does... So that kind of collaboration was there. He came up, okay, let's talk about, can we have something on editing, Ray's editing. So I think Orgo Komal Mitro, he spoke to, and he immediately called me and said, I've had this lovely conversation, I'm putting that in. So that way it was, and all of this happened during the pandemic, you know. He'll tell you that often I was not able to talk properly. I was breathing, I had breathing issues and he couldn't hear me. And I was just, we were working like that on the book. So I think, you know, it's a wonderful collaborative experience, and Borunda is a great raconteur. You know, like the way he narrates a story is, you know, so a couple of people who have read this have come back to me saying that, porte darun lagche, addar moton lagche. You know, like that kind of thing is there in the book. So I think that worked for us, Borunda. I think I had very little to add to the book in terms of given what you provided, the basic material.
No, but you but I could always use you as a bouncing board. That was very important for me. And that worked for me. So don't say it's not a contribution.
Wonderful. So towards the end of this session, I know all of you are waiting with bated breath. We'll open it up for questions from the audience. But before we go there, just a few other questions from our end. And I also wanted to know from you, Srijit, as well as you, Shantanu, if there are any questions or any comments either about the book that you want to make, or any question that you want to ask Baba. Srijit, anything that you want to ask? And
Yes,
not just
I-
Baba, Shundar Das here, Siddharth Das here.
Okay, then to it will.
করো না, একটা দুটো প্রশ্ন করো।
No, but I wanted to know about. So, did you read the original book before you? And did that affect your characterization or understanding of the character? Was it in conflict with Ray's understanding? Like Ray's interpretation of Aronet Dinratri is apparently very different from what Shunilda wanted Aronet Dinratri to be. So did you feel there was any conflict in that sense in case of Shima Baddo as well?
No, actually, I was visiting Ray quite regularly at that time, and I was going off for the puja vacation. I said that I won't be here for some time, and he said, "Kothay jaccho?" So I said, "I'm going somewhere," and he said, "Tumi Bangla boi poro?" I mean, "Huh, obosshoi pori." But I don't know what gave him the idea that I was anglicized, and বলে না তখন অতটা ছিল না না কিন্তু আমি বললাম আপনাকে কে বললে আমি বাংলা পড়ি না তুমি পুজোর সংখ্যা পড়ো হ্যাঁ পড়ি আমাকে কিনতে হতো না আমি বিজ্ঞাপনে কাজ করি তো পেয়ে যেতাম পুজো সংখ্যাগুলো তো আমি বললাম হ্যাঁ আমি রেগুলারলি আনন্দবাজার দেশ এগুলো সবকটাই পড়ি এবারকার দেশে দুটো গল্প বেরিয়েছে একটা শঙ্করের সীমাবদ্ধ আর একটা হচ্ছে সুনীলের সাদাবাড়ি কালো রাস্তা এই দুটো পড়ে রেখো তো I thought that all right he just asked me to read it so I'll read it fine I never thought that he wanted me to read it because he was actually thinking of me for one of these two characters I didn't the thought didn't strike me but yes he asked me to read the book and then after he read out the script to me I found it absolutely meaningless to go back to the book because it was totally different and he wouldn't give me the script so the first reading was all I had to go by nothing else
And what was the Pratidwandi parallel to this?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I haven't to this day read Pratidwandi, but as a principle, I've always followed this principle that when a film is being made from a novel, I deliberately did not read the novel because I did not, precisely for this reason, that I did not want a conflict between the director's vision and the writer's vision. To me, when I'm acting in a film, I see my obligation being only to one thing, which is to the vision of the director as much as I can understand it. Therefore, I do not want to be influenced by anything else. Srijit, you just mentioned Aronet Dinratri. The thing about Aronet, it's, by the way, it's one of my favorite Shrutikray films because I love the structure of it. I love the structure of it. But one has to remember that a lot of Bangla films were made from stories or novels that had been serialized. And serialized novels in many ways, whether they were written by Shunilda or somebody eminent, in many ways they were like Bangla TV serials. You had to stretch them out, create character after character. And then if you were lucky, if the serialized product did well, then it was published as a novel. But it still wasn't a film. So any good filmmaker, and certainly Rai, would take the property, would take the gist, and then make it his own. That was the important thing.
Thank you so much, Shundarda. And a quick question. So after Shimabadho, did you ever, when you met the great man, drop a hint about what is happening to Shadabari Kalo Rasta? The other book which he asked you to read? Or other,
No, I didn't. I didn't. Because...
do you want to work with him again?
No, he never discussed that book anymore. And as a matter of fact, I was very surprised to know that Babu or even Bodhi weren't aware that he was seriously contemplating making a film on Shadabari Kalo Rasta, because they've never discussed it. In their books, in our discussions, ever, no. Kalo Rasta Shadabari.
So that's a trivia for the Ray files, you know, the quizzers.
Yeah, the book is full of trivia like this, you know, like you were part of Pratidwandi also, which I didn't know because, you know, yeah, he was part of Pratidwandi and his voice was scored by Ray himself because you're not. So you had a scene where there's Ritimanda and there's Borunda with a voice by Satyajit Ray. No. Back. So, and also the fact that both Dhritimanda and Borunda were in the running for Feluda before Shomit, because
I would like to know something about that, about the Feluda. No, but did Ray ever consider you as a possible...
No, the question was something that Shantanu raised about apparently Borun and I being in the running for doing Feluda. I just want to say that I wasn't in the running and have never been in the running for anything at all, unless I've been approached for something specifically.
But
I just wanted to put that on record.
To speak the truth, Sundar, he did mention that to me. We'll come to that incident later, about what kind of a man Ray was like. Where he confided to me, talked about selection of Feluda. And he had said, we'll reserve for later. But your name did occur, and quite flatteringly.
We will come to that in a
Would
bit.
Topshe like to say anything about this selection? No. Enjoy the dialogue.
But before we come to that, you know, what kind of a man was Ray, and the specific conversation that you had with him around Peruda, what I also wanted to praise the audience here is it's not just about facets of his filmmaking. It's not just technical stuff. Neither is it only his recollections of the making of Shimabadho, which is the first part of the book. In fact, the second part of the book is replete with different kinds of incidents and anecdotes, which, as Baba said right up front, they were in his mind and his memory, right? And you know, people of his generation and Chundokaku would have that. And it was important to put them down on paper. And there are some of them which are absolutely hilarious. For example, the ones about Chobi Vishwash. So I'm wondering if you want to read out a passage or two.
Unfortunately, I've never had the chance to act with him, Chobi Babu. But there were a whole lot of people in the unit, like Onuntoda, the makeup man, who told me this story of this anecdote. And I thought that, you know, I have to have a special chapter on Chobi Babu, because the more I listened to about the anecdotes, and he seemed to grow larger and larger in image. And whatever little I had seen of him on celluloid. And I thought that I had to have a separate chapter. I will just read out one particular part, which Anantha told me. Chobi Babu was given to drinking even in the middle of shooting. Ray, a teetotaler all his life, wouldn't ever have approved of it, especially while shooting was on. So how did Biswas circumvent this problem when shooting for Ray? This story was confided to me by Anantha Das, Ray's trusted makeup man. Since Anantha Das was actually involved in the story, one could say it came directly from the horse's mouth. When Chobi Babu arrived at the makeup room for the shooting, he took out a bottle of gin from his bag. Noticing that Anantha was frowning at him, Biswas asked, "What? What's wrong?" Anantha had to explain to him there would be a furor if Manikda ever came to know about it. But Chobi Babu was adamant. He was going to have his drink come what may. So he ordered Anantha to fetch a few green coconuts from the market with the dab. With the top half chopped off, he made sure that the coconuts arrived with straws as well. When the green coconuts arrived, he threw part of the liquid from the fruits and poured gin into them. After that, it was smooth sailing for him. He delicately sipped the contents of the green coconut with a straw without any eyebrows raised. That was Chobi Babu. Yeah. No, I can carry on and on, but I think that you have to read it. The chapter on Chobi Babu. It's absolutely hilarious. There was, I wish Aloknanda was here tonight. She's shooting in London. Unfortunate for me, unfortunate for us. She told me a story about Kanchenjunga, where she, along with her mother, had arrived a couple of days earlier. And just before the day of shooting, Chobi Babu arrived in the evening. And then he was passing through that passage, and Aloknanda, the young girl, sprightly young girl, and said, in passing, he stopped. "Who is this?" So before anyone could say anything, "I am your youngest daughter." My youngest daughter. He looked up and down this place. After sunset, his room was far beyond this. After sunset, you shall not cross this barrier, and you shall not traverse that side. So Aloknanda told me, I just couldn't understand what she was talking about. And much later, many years later, she realized that Chobi Babu prohibited from women coming to his room when they were drinking. And he didn't drink alone. He had his pallies always around with him. But the evening hours were all reserved for drinking. So that was what he was like.
We'll talk about what he was as a man, Satyajit, right? We'll probably end with that and then take questions from the audience. But before that, I think we have just about enough time to talk about something else, particularly because Shundo Kaku and Siddhartha are both here, and that is Ray being an actor's director. A lot has been said about this, has been written and published about this, and I know you've got a passage, several passages on this, but at least actor, if you can read out and then maybe have Siddhartha and Shundo Kaku also talk a little bit about their experiences.
He was very, very sensitive to the needs of an actor. I had constant conversation with Pradeep Mukherjee and a whole lot of others, because at that time we couldn't meet physically. because of COVID. And so we had to converse on the telephone all the time. And he told me, I'll read out from Pradeep Babu's, and he couldn't come this evening because, again, he was out of sorts. Pradeep also made a very interesting point to me. I think Manikda very often wrote the script with a particular actor in mind. I have a feeling that he wrote my part of the script specially for me. And then I remembered Shima Bodhoya's dialogues with Harihar Talukdar, especially discussing my height. I was 6 feet 2 inches tall. Pradeep also confided to me that Manikda had specifically asked him what made him feel comfortable, wearing the shirt over the trousers or tucking them under. And Pradeep had answered, wearing them over. In real life, Pradeep hardly ever wore the shirt tucked inside his trousers. Okay, so that's the way you are going to dress in the movie, Manikda told him. I think he wanted me to be in my comfort zone while acting John Orondo. And then I will just read out just one incident which speaks of great insight on his part and sensitivity to the needs of an actor. It pertains to Mr. Talukdar, who did the role of Talukdar, Ajay Banerjee. As we started rehearsing, we were shooting there on Saturdays and Sundays only because it was a genuine office and they had been given to us as a special favor to Ray. And the incident that I recount here happened on a Saturday. I had a scene with Harihar Talukdar on our personal manager, enacted by a guy called Ajay Banerjee, who also happened to be a professional stage actor. I think it was a little past 1 p.m. As we started rehearsing the shot at my office, Ajay started fumbling with his lines. This was very unusual because Ajay was a dependable actor. What made matters worse was with each passing rehearsal, his nervousness kept increasing. He was not only fumbling now, but stammering as well. And the shot involved Talukdar borrowing a cigarette from my packet on the table and lighting one while speaking just one line. In no time at all, the ashtray on my table was choked with the butt ends of these cigarettes, and still the take didn't come through. This was supposed to be the last shot before lunch break. Ray kept looking at his watch. Normally, he announced lunch break at 1 p.m. Suddenly, Ray stopped shooting. Are Ajay, don't you have a show at Wrong Mahal today in the afternoon? Ajay lowered his head and muttered, yes, sir. What time does it start? At 3 o'clock, sir. But I'm required to be there before 2:30. Wrong Mahal, a theatre house where Ajay regularly appeared as an actor, was some distance away. It was also his bread and butter. And when is this show over? At 5:30 p.m., sir. But my part should be over by 3:45. Oh, great. Do you think you could come back by 4:30 p.m. then? Yes, sir. Suddenly, Ajay was beaming ear to ear. I can certainly manage that. Okay, lunch break. Ray announced as Ajay was hurrying away. Ray called him back. Don't go without having lunch. Ray knew that they didn't serve lunch to the actors at Wrong Mahal. If Ajay left now, he would have to go without lunch for the day. When Ajay returned after completing his assignment at the theatre, it was just a little after 4 o'clock. And miracle of miracles, the very first take was an okay take. He was on fire that evening. Every shot, first take, okay. Now what would you call that? A very perceptive director, a great humanist, or a very good psychologist? Take your pick. But I think, when I say that he was an actor's director, this kind of incident exemplifies that, you know, the understanding of an actor, the mental makeup when he's going to act for his role, more than anybody else did. Sundar, would you like to elaborate on this? This.
Elaborate, so as I said, we can keep going
No, no,
on
no,
and
no,
on,
no.
but I mean, what,
Till the
do I
cows
have
come home.
25 seconds or 2.5 minutes? I'm asking of you. 2.5 minutes. All right, okay. No, but seriously, you know, one of the things that occurred to me much later was that I mean, it was true of me when I first went and saw him before Pratikdandi, that when it was a new person, a new intending actor, he would chat and chat and chat and chat, and not necessarily about the film, about various sorts of things. Later, it occurred to me that that was his way of observing a person and observing his or her, what is now called body language, manner of speaking, and so on. And these he would incorporate in the role that he was writing, which particularly for a new actor, it made life much easier. I mean, my personal experience, I cannot, in my first film, the overall recollection that I have is of a very, very relaxed, what these days is called a chilled out time, without, although sets used to be very warm and not air conditioned in those days, so it was hardly chilled out. But there was, and I mean this seriously, there was never any tension. I've never seen Satyajit Ray get outrageously angry, for example. It was always chilled out. That was one. Two, the other thing was that, you know, he gave you, or at least he gave me and many others, the flexibility to modify the dialogue a little bit if you wanted, if you were more comfortable with it. I mean, I've seen when I've worked in Bombay and I've had to deal with pretty difficult Hindi bits of dialogue with which I have a problem because Hindi is not my natural language. When I've tried to deviate, the director and the screenplay writer have both been, let us say, less than happy. I mean, you know, Hindi dialogue is sort of cast in stone because it is a statement that the screenplay or the dialogue writer is making about his or her own capabilities. But to Rai, it did not matter. That was the second thing. A third thing, is 2.5 minutes over? All right. A third thing, and this again I realized later, is that, you know, he had, I found, essentially two distinct ways of dealing with actors. Some actors, he let them be, let them do things the way they wanted to, and intervened only when he thought that something was not going right. The other way was directing precisely. I mean, you know, after sync sound shooting, when we were going to dub and so on, in the shot, I've heard him tell actors, "Ebare badike takao, ebare ekটু থামো, এবার পেছন ফেরো," things like that. So, which was a completely different sort of technique, and I won't, of course, but I can tell you some roles which have been fabulous roles. We've talked about those roles later, which have been created like this, through absolutely, if you want to use the term, artificial kind of direction.
Good evening. No, Sundar যেটা বললো, I completely agree because I was a 13.5-year-old kid. And to understand what is Ray is the height, that's the only thing I could understand. And the voice, nothing else. I didn't know much about Satyajit Ray, except I was disgusted watching Pather Pachari because I had to cry. And I told him that. Now, see what Sundar said, you know, to make the intending artist compatible, I used to stay in Bhawanipur, Bharati Cinema, and he used to stay in Bishop Lefroy Road. So to the main road, he had to go to the Indpuri studio. Just because I'm a new actor and my first day shot and this and that. So he said, can I pick you up in the morning? I said, no problem. So the car would enter Rupchand Mukherjee Lane, second house was ours, and I would be standing on the veranda. 4747 is the car number, if I remember rightly. Godada was there, and the car would go in. He would be sitting in the front seat. So I would get in. কি ব্রেকফাস্ট হয়েছে? হ্যাঁ। কি হলো? বললাম ওই আমার একটু ভাত খাওয়ার অভ্যেস আছে তো। So I had boiled rice, boiled egg, আলু সেদ্ধ, typical Bengali. Oh, খুব ভালো, খুব ভালো. Later, Babuda told me this Sheddo Bhat was one of his favorite food. So he used to understand that this guy has had Sheddo Bhat, why not me also? So, এই গাড়িতে, while you travel up to the Indrapuri studio at Tollygunj, he used to talk about football, something like Ghuri Orano, kite flying and all that. So by that time, I was in front of the camera, in front of Satyajit Ray. I had got used to him. So I was not having any fear factor as to how to do things like that. Just exactly like the Shuddha said. But that, ebar goro, halka kore chokta tono. Ei ব্যাপারটা I have faced. Because there was no dialogue except that, some expressions were being shot. So I think, I think basically he would get very close to you. And that was the trick, whoever it is. And I'm not talking about Chobi Bishwash and all that, but he would go very close to it. Even Santosh Kaku, Jatayu. Santosh. And what is that? I don't know. Baki would happen. And then we were talking about Chobi Babu, Chobi Bishwash drinking, barrier and all that. In Shonarkel also, I was a kid, so, But I know what was a drink like, because my father used to drink, so I am used to whiskey bottles and rum bottles. So in Shonarkela, there was a crisis while we were shooting in Jaisalmer, because we had to carry our provisions from Jodhpur, and that was what? You never used to get anything over those days. So, kacha deem, some dal, some chal and all. And obviously for Kamu Mukherjee, Bondar Bose and Ajay Marujje and Shobita Chatterjee and all that, the other things were required, which are the evening fast-moving consumer goods. So that was required. What happened after 4-5 days, it got over. And in the evening, I could understand the whole team was like absolutely irritated. The news went up to Ray. So indirectly he was giving us support that if these actors do not have their drinks, tomorrow my shoot is gone, finished. But he would not encourage anyway. But then there's a different story that how drinks were organized in a desert. That's a different story. I mean, we can go on continuing and it will take time. Thank you.
You had a question.
No, I just, Borunda mentioned this, the supportive role that the director, Satyajit Ray, played for his actors. But you have in this book a very interestingly titled chapter, which was one of the main reasons for us also doing the book, where you say dictator or director, and there's this wonderful piece of information that you bring about DCK actually making his child actor cry, and then actually bicycle thief. So would you between a director and a dictator and, and the supportive role, what kind of figure would you see?
See, I mean, that chapter was written mainly because normally there is a director, there is a script writer, there is a dialogue writer, there is a costume designer, there is a cast selector, whatever. All these things are different people specialized in doing all that. But Ray kept everything centralized. He would select, yes, all right, I like this guy as Topshe. I like this guy as Peluda. So and so forth. He did his own cast selection. He did his own dress selection, costume, everything. Dialogues, all his. Script, all his. So what kind of a man was he? I mean, he was virtually in any other industry, he would be regarded as a director. Not so much as a director, but as a dictator. But he made it look very, very easy for himself. So that. No, yes, there is one chapter which deals with what kind of man was Ray like. And there are a whole lot of things that I've confided in this chapter. But one incident that stands out in my mind, because it concerned me, and it concerns, fortunately or unfortunately, Sundar as well. One evening, when I was chatting with Babu in his room, the great man called me over to his study. I went there not having the foggiest idea of what to expect. He made me sit down and started talking to me. I had never heard him talk to me in such a soft, gentle voice. You must know by now that I have decided to cast Soumitra in the role of Feluda. And I can feel how deeply you are hurt about it. Frankly, till that moment I wasn't. But the way he talked to me, I suddenly had a lump in my throat. I looked steadfastly down at my toes so he wouldn't notice. You see, it's not that I didn't consider you for the role. I did. In my mind, I was desperately pleading with Manikda, please don't say another word. It's your film, and you've got every right to choose whoever you want to. And for God's sake, you don't owe me an explanation, for heaven's sake. So please don't make it any more difficult for me, because I might start crying now. But he kept on talking in that soft, gentle voice. You know, to me, the ideal Feluda would have been a combination of three different persons. Sundar, you better listen to this. I want Feluda to look like you. I want Sundar's intellect. And I want Soumitra's way of sharply delineated spoken Bengali. I bent my head lower and lower. So I finally chose Soumitra. But I want you to know that it was a very difficult decision. He put a hand gently on my shoulder and let it rest there. I hope you understand. I bit my lower lip as hard as I could and still couldn't prevent the tears from welling up. You see, Ray could make a grown-up man cry without trying. So what kind of a man was Ray like? Could he be warm, generous, and kind? My personal experience tend to say yes. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, seems...
That's God's truth. Huh? No. Just, no.
So this seems like the perfect note on which to open up discussion for some questions. Why don't we do this? We have at least 2 or 3 mics which are working here, and this one can be passed around to anyone who wants to ask a question.
Hello. Good evening. Good evening, Borunda. Good evening, Srijitda. Good evening, Mr. Rachaudhuri. Good evening, Obik. Borunda, the question that I wanted to ask you, you have been asked many a times how was it working with Sharmila Tagore. But my question to you is, your chemistry with Parumita Di, Sudarshana, Dolon, sorry, that was terrific. To my knowledge, that was her first film also. How was the experience working with her, and how did the casting happen? It was a very, very interesting casting and a terrific chemistry between you and
the casting happened because actually I was part instrumental in her getting this role, because he had made enquiries about different ladies for this particular role, and one day he asked me, "Hey, Borun, tumi Paramita Chaudhary from the হ্যাঁ পারমিতাকে আমি চিনি বুলবুল ও তো ওর একটা অ্যাড ফিল্মের একটা স্টুডিও রান করে, রেকর্ডিং হয়, রেডিও কমার্শিয়ালস জিঙ্গলস এসব হয়। ও কীরকম ঠিকঠাক? হ্যাঁ, আই found her quite okay. I mean, easy to work with. I didn't know at that time that she was going to be my screen wife, and she became one. And I didn't have to do anything special for that. It just happened like that. She was a natural. Yes. She was a very, very good actress, and it's a pity that she didn't act again. Whereas Manikda was worried that I would be nervous acting with Shormila. I wasn't really. I was actually nervous acting with প্রশান্ত মল্লিক না, আরেকজন ভাই আমাদের যে মানে ওই Haradhan Babu, with his booming voice and personality, I used to sort of almost cringe when doing a role with him, I mean, when doing a scene with him. But other than that, I didn't feel any nervousness at all.
Any other questions, please?
All of us are enjoying this fantastic conversation. And as Srijit Mukherjee pointed out, it's, with both Shamolindu and Siddharth in front of us, it's the stuff dreams are made of. Just asking one or two questions which may not seem to be right, maybe, I don't know, because I'm speaking in front of a director too. Soumitra Chatterjee said once during an interview on the television in 1977, that Ray's dialogues are written in such a way that you act well naturally. Is there any truth in it? I mean, how far is this true?
Yes, I mean, he did make it easy for, I mean, that's what he said, talked about, that's what I talked about vis-a-vis Pradip Mukherjee. I mean, he would make things very easy for the first-time actor, especially.
And there are, Ray is famous for his details, very Chekhovian details. Yeah. For example, you you returned from office, picked up the phone, were these details part of the script or were these improvised?
No. They were impromptu. Okay. They were impromptu.
And for example, your wife was speaking...
I mean, in the script, it was that he picks up the phone and finds out that the phone is working now.
এটা দারুণ, ঢুকলো, ফোনটা দেখে ফোনটা কি ঠিক হয়েছে, রেখে দেওয়া. These are the things which make which enliven the celluloid. Another thing, for example, when Paramita was speaking to you on the phone very loudly, there's a huge difference between your personalities, and you sort of moved your ear away from the phone receiver. Was that part of the dialogue, or did he ask you to?
No, he didn't.
But that was very important.
But he allowed it. I thought that I had exaggerated it slightly.
No, but I think it's very important for the characterization.
He never said a word.
Okay.
If I sort of did what was not required, I thought, I could have said,
but it fell in place.
No.
It fell in place.
ঠিক আছে, আমি ফিরে আসি, আমি বেশ কথা বলবো.
But
that would have been absolutely okay.
It expressed
but
a difference
when I did that, it was rather Bodhi who laughed later on. He said, that was very good.
Okay.
That was very good. And she wanted me in a comic role. I mean, she told me that if I ever make a movie, I'll make a comic role for you.
Just two short questions, very short questions. One to Srijit Babu. সেটা হচ্ছে যে you belong to the next generation and one of the foremost filmmakers, of course. How does such tradition of one of the great filmmakers help you in, of course you carved out your own space, but does it percolate down somewhere and unconscious, did it help you?
No, absolutely it does. And when you've grown up on stories of how he used to make his actors feel very comfortable, you adopt the same modus operandi, actually, what I would like to borrow from Shundarda. So I allow my actors to have that kind of a freedom to improvise. I think it makes for a, if cinema is about getting as close to reality as possible, I think it just makes everything and everyone look more real if they're allowed to operate in the comfort zone. Obviously not to the point of being in conflict with the characterization of the character you have in mind, but given that degree of freedom, yes, I think it makes absolute sense. And this is a process which obviously when you read about and you hear about in such events, it stays in your mind. And it did stay in my mind in 2010 when I started off. So it's a process which I've successfully used, putting everyone at ease. Again, another important thing is that, the written word cannot be as important as the felt word, is what I feel. So which is why whenever I have a script, I devise that with my actors before I start shooting, so that if there is any passage or any dialogue or anything which is not organic to them or which is not coming organically to them, they can tweak it to their advantage, and I then incorporate it with having the bigger scheme in mind, the bigger scheme of the scene in mind. So devising scenes before you shoot them, that also a lot of times entails a change in the script, change in dialogues, but that is something I love to do because I like to keep it free-flowing and dynamic, rather than stick to the script being the Holy Bible which cannot be messed with.
What about what Ray always did? He had a graphic composition in mind, the framing of each shot, etc. Does that help you too, or you do go your own way?
No, of course it does that, but my process is much more rudimentary. It doesn't have the finesse. And Ray, let's face it, was a polymath. Let's not mince words when we praise him. He was not normal. I don't think it's. I mean, I've heard him I've heard stories of him reproducing staff notation of Mozart compositions 40 years after he heard it on a Berlin radio. Normal people don't do that. I mean, they can't do that. If you go through his books, which I have had the fortune to go through, the precision, the detailing with which he's drawn, he's storyboarded all his films, starting from the camera movement, the light position, the costume. I mean, there's no point trying to emulate it because one can't. As I said, he's a library, he's not even a book. I mean, I have known directors who are fat books whom you can learn from. Ray was a library. So my thing is that, yes, of course I see my frames in my mind, but I do not have the capacity to sketch it systematically in a storyboard formation. And in fact, for Pother Pachali, he didn't even have a script to begin with. He only had pictures, the storyboarding and the scenarios, which is obviously something which is now well known thanks to Aparajito. But this is something which we have read a lot of times, and you can only gasp in awe and at least try to emulate the process that you see a film and then you make it. So you see it in your mind. And then you take the help of your collaborators like your DOP, your costume designer. For mere mortals, there are other departments also, which have HODs. For Ray, there was no other HOD. There was only one, as he said. So for us, luckily, we have cinematographers, costume designers, production designers who have sketchbooks, who know how to sketch. So we can convey that, they do that for us, for men who knew too little.
So well said. And
Attention to detail. I can't resist the temptation of recounting one incident when Ganeshottru was going to be made, and I visited and so on, and we started talking. It was, I think, the first meeting about the film, and costume person was there, and so on and so forth. He asked the costume person to take my shoe size, but to make the heels a little higher than, normal, which surprised me a bit. And I also felt a little bad because, with me there was Soumitra Chatterjee. So I was wondering why. Then towards the end of the shoot, there is a scene where Soumitra and I are on stage talking on the mic, and he's talking and I take over the mic from him. I realized then that he had done this right in the beginning, because that scene was, and the way he was going to do that scene, which is he was going to do one tracking shot, which included both Soumitra and me. He had already visualized that scene. And he knew that if there was a great difference in height between the two actors, the shot would not look nice. So, that is the kind of detail and forethought that he, but we were, this is not relevant necessarily to this discussion. We were talking of flexibility and improvisation. The big daddy of improvisation in Bengali cinema, his centenary is just coming up. And we'll talk more about that. I have worked with that person in scenes. When we've started to shoot the scene, there has been literally no dialogue.
so well said. And the word I will go back home with is library, which is, I think, very well used word. Just one thing before I finish, because I'm taking up so much time because Ondrila wants to speak. I have to congratulate Borunda for selecting the title, The Man Who Knew Too Much from Hitchcock's film. And it's so apt. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shimada.
Quick question before we end, Borunda. Advertising. He was a DJ Kima man. How much did that influence his filmmaking, his advertising background? What did he get out of it for filmmaking?
To a great extent. He once told me, and it's written there, documented here, that his experience as an art director in DJ Kima helped him immensely later on in life.
Storyboards.
In becoming a filmmaker. He said, I knew photography because he had this 35mm camera, Leica, I think. And he used to shoot. So he knew about framing. But art direction gives you a clear idea how to frame things, an object or whatever else it is. So that. And then calligraphy, lettering, everything came into, yes. ডিকের সঙ্গে যে বাংলার এই বুক কাভার্স যেগুলো, those are incredible things. That also was because of his advertising experience. I mean, though he was, strictly speaking, moonlighting, it was DJ Kima work, no.
He designed the cover for Nehru's book also.
That too, yes.
Were the campaigns in Shimabuddu also designed by him? The campaigns, the TVCs of the fan and everything?
Everything.
Okay.
Thank you. I'll just make a quick comment. Based on what Shundoda and you said, I'm reminded of two scenes, one from Shimabodhu and one from Pratidwandi. The Shimabodhu scene, you just mentioned your interaction with the labor leader, which will later lead to the conspiracy, which would lead to the strike and then the lockout, which will help you to avoid that clause, the penalty clause. Now, there is a shot there, which is, we talk of Wonkar Y and other famous metteur en scènes who really make films, but there is a shot, you're on the phone, and after a point of time, the camera leaves you and goes into the coil of the telephone, which was there in those days, and stays there. And that coil telephone is a metaphor for the kind of controversy which would create later. It's a conspiracy, really. So were you aware that he was going to leave you and go into that?
He never told me. He never told me. I only saw it later. No, it did not come down from the face. He had taken two versions of this shot. One was a genuine film, telephone cut kind of thing, where I was everywhere and I was talking to him on the phone. The second time, said, hello, and he did not take my face at all. He actually was concentrating on that.
Why?
And he started very slowly zooming in. Or was it a trolley shot? I wouldn't know, because I never looked at him. Because you do your own thing, forget what he's doing. So, and the edited thing, I see the tension of the coils getting larger and larger till it fills up the entire screen. That's the state of my mind, I thought.
So, I'm obsessed with one area of Rai's work, which I've been writing quite a few articles on different, that is that apparently he's known to be a very good storyteller, but there are many things in many of his films which go beyond the story, which people have not read. So I'll just give you the other, in Pratidwandi, which of course uses a lot of techniques which go beyond the straight narrative. If you would pardon me for being a little outrageous, he was actually doing a sen there, because the sen is known for that kind of spiky syntax, despite the famous... Yes. 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 So the seed is that he was doing that. But the way he complicates the narrative, and it includes Borunda and Shundurda, is that the scene in which the back to the camera with Rai's voice, he actually tells him that if you don't get a job anywhere, then you can come to me, which makes it very, very, what shall we say, resonant, because upturning the table and leaving and going to a new job would seem like one of those new age films where you raise the red flag at the end. He didn't do that. He's already told him that there is a job waiting for you. So that's a complexity, a very, very interesting complexity, so in which both of you, that's where Ray is Ray. And I'd like to say that Ray is not just a filmmaker who's telling stories, but he's taking the space between the stories, just like in his dialogue. So that's what I wanted to say.
I think that was an absolutely wonderful interaction that we had. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, so much for your time. Don't go away. There are a few announcements in waiting. But I'd like to take this opportunity to again thank our panelists, Shantanu-da, Srijit, and by extension, Shundor Kaku, Siddhartha, for making this session very engaging, very eventful and lively. Before we go, maybe a final vote of thanks.
Yes, this is going to be a lengthy thing. I'm certainly indebted to Om International and to Shantanu in particular for having faith in the book, to Starma for the most generous arrangements for this evening, Prohor for being, arranging this photography and shooting the entire thing, to Srijit, my dear friend, for being the guest of honor, and it carries on. My indebtedness to fellow actors, for their interviews, Aparna Sen, Alok Nanda Rai, Dipankar De, Pradip Mukherjee, Chandana Banerjee. Many of them are not here this evening, unfortunately. And my indebtedness also to Babu, Shundip Ray, for being so generous in arranging everything for me, to Ashit Poddar and Smita Dotto for the photographer, for the cover design, And Raghu Sharma for the fantastic cover design, Vivek Das for high-resolution scans of the photographs, Argu Kamal Babu Mitro for insight into Ray's editing, Shomindu Roy for Ray's cinematography, Somnath Ray for being my almanac on Ray, Obhijit Dasgupta for some rare interviews, which you happened to interview him. They have never been published before. So that is a long list, and I am deeply, deeply indebted, grateful to all of you, my audience, many of whom are my personal friends, and too many to sort of, mention by name. And I really, really, from the bottom of my heart, I thank you for being here this evening and making it a super, super success. That's it for the evening. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here.